My name is Dorothy Sullivan. Most people who've known me long enough call me Dot. I'm 66 years old and I live in a white wood frame house on Maple Street in Portland, Oregon. The same house where I raised my son, buried my husband, and planted every rose bush in the front yard with my own 2 hands. I tell you this because before I tell you what happened, you need to understand what this house means to me. It's not just a structure with walls and a roof and a furnace that groans every February. It's the place where Frank and I built our entire life together. 38 years of Sunday morning pancakes in that kitchen. 38 years of falling asleep to the sound of rain on the bedroom window. The apple tree in the backyard. Frank planted it in 1991, the year Nathan turned 5, because he said every boy should grow up with a tree he could climb. That tree is still there. It still blooms every April without fail, as if it's keeping a promise Frank made before he died. Frank passed 5 years ago. Pancreatic cancer. He was gone in 4 months. From diagnosis to the last morning I held his hand in that bedroom while the sun came through the curtains the way it always did. If you've lost someone that way, you know there are no words for it. You just carry it. Every day, you carry it. After he was gone, I found a kind of peace in the house itself. The way the afternoon light falls across the living room floor at 3 o'clock. The sound the back porch makes in the wind. The smell of the kitchen in the morning. These things kept me company. I wasn't lonely the way people feared I would be. I had my routines, my neighbor Harry down the street, my Tuesday afternoon calls with my sister Patricia out in Seattle. I was, against all reasonable expectation, doing all right. Then my son Nathan called me on a Sunday evening and said the words that changed everything. "Mom, Renee and I have been talking. We don't think you should be alone in that house anymore. We want to move in with you. We want to take care of you." I was quiet for a moment. I remember looking out the kitchen window at Frank's apple tree, bare that time of year, and thinking, he would have wanted this. A family in the house again. Nathan coming home. "All right," I told him. "Come home." How naive I was. The first 6 months were genuinely good. I want to be honest about that, because this story isn't one where the warning signs were there from the very beginning, and I simply refused to see them. For those first 6 months, Nathan and Renee were attentive and warm. Nathan fixed the loose railing on the back porch that had bothered me for 2 years. Renee learned that I take my coffee with 1 sugar and half, not milk, and she never got it wrong after the first week. On Friday evenings, we watched old movies together in the living room, the 3 of us on the couch with a bowl of popcorn between us. And I genuinely thought, this is what the last chapter of a good life looks like. Then, about 5 months ago, something shifted. I can't point to one single morning when I woke up and everything was different. It was more like watching a photograph fade. The warmth in Nathan's eyes when he looked at me became something more careful, more managed. Renee's smile stayed exactly the same. And that was precisely the problem. A real smile changes. It responds to the moment. Hers stopped responding to anything. The conversations shortened. Not in a rude way. They were never rude, and that, I would later understand, was entirely deliberate. But when I walked into a room where the 2 of them had been talking, the talking stopped. Not gradually, the way a conversation winds down naturally. It stopped the way a radio cuts to static when you walk into a dead zone. Immediate, total, and then the recovery. Nathan reaching for his phone, Renee turning to ask me if I wanted tea. So smooth that I began to wonder if I was imagining things. I wasn't imagining things, but for a while I told myself I was. The first thing I noticed that I could not explain away was the door at the end of the upstairs hallway. That room had been Frank's small office for most of our marriage. The place where he kept his books and his fishing tackle and the old record player he'd had since college. After he died, I converted it into a storage room. His things were still in there mostly. Boxes of photographs, the record player, his reading chair, which I couldn't bring myself to get rid of, but couldn't bear to look at every day. The door had always been left open, or at most pulled halfway shut. There was no reason to close it. 3 months after Nathan and Renee moved in, the door was locked. I noticed it on a Tuesday morning when I walked past and saw that the old brass knob had been replaced. A new knob, silver and modern, with a keyhole I didn't recognize. I stood there for a moment looking at it the way you look at something that is wrong, but that you cannot immediately articulate why. That evening I asked, as casually as I could manage, "Did something happen with the storage room? The lock looks different." Renee answered before Nathan could. Oh, we noticed there was a moisture issue in there. We didn't want your things to get damaged, so we put a better lock on it while we figure out the ventilation problem. Nothing to worry about, Dot. She smiled that precise, unchanging smile. I said, I see, and I went back to my book. But I lay awake that night thinking, I never gave them permission to change that lock. I never discussed moisture. And when I had walked past that door in the weeks before, I had sometimes heard, or thought I heard, sounds from inside. Footsteps, a muffled voice. Once, late at night, what might have been a laugh that didn't belong to Nathan or Renee. The next afternoon, while they were both out, I went upstairs and tried my master key in that new lock. It didn't work. They had changed the lock on a room in my own house, the room where Frank's things still lived, and they had not given me a key. I stood in that hallway for a long time. I want to tell you that I confronted them immediately, that I demanded answers, that I was the strong woman I like to think I am. But the truth is, I went back downstairs, made myself a cup of tea, and sat with the feeling for a while. Because here is the thing about growing old that nobody warns you about. When something goes wrong, there is always a voice in the back of your mind that whispers, maybe it's you. Maybe you misremember. Maybe you're being difficult. Maybe you're becoming the thing everyone is afraid you'll become. I had to be sure before I spoke. I had to be absolutely sure. 3 weeks later, I became sure. It was 11:30 at night. I had gone to bed early but hadn't slept. I've had trouble sleeping since Frank died, which is a whole other story. And I was lying in the dark, listening to the house settle, when I heard the front door open. I got up quietly. I've learned to move quietly in this house over 38 years. I know which floorboards to avoid, which stairs creak, and which are silent. I made my way to the edge of the hallway where I could see down to the entrance without being seen. Renee was standing at the open front door. Outside on the porch was a young woman I had never seen before. Late 20s, maybe 30, carrying a small rolling suitcase. They spoke in low voices. The young woman reached into her jacket pocket and took out what I could see, even from the top of the stairs, was a folded stack of cash. She handed it to Renee. Renee counted it quickly with the ease of someone who has done this many times, tucked it into the pocket of her cardigan, and stepped aside to let the young woman in. They went down the hall, toward the locked door. I heard the key turn. I saw the yellow light spill out for just a moment before the door closed again. I stood at the top of the stairs in my nightgown, and I thought, so I am not imagining things. The next morning at breakfast I said nothing. I made coffee. I asked Nathan about his work. I watched Renee butter her toast with that efficient, practiced calm, and I understood something new about her. She was a very good actress. She had been acting for months, and she was good enough at it that she had nearly convinced me that my own instincts were wrong. I had spent 38 years raising a family and running a household and making hard decisions without flinching. I was not going to let a well-rehearsed smile make me doubt myself any longer. I needed proof. I needed to understand exactly what was happening in my own home. And to get that proof, I was going to need help. Harry Patterson has lived across the street from me for 25 years. He is 74 years old, a retired high school history teacher, a widower since his wife Margaret passed 3 years ago. He is the kind of man who still wears a proper shirt to check the mail, who keeps his small front garden immaculate, who has never once failed to wave when he sees me through the window. Every Tuesday afternoon for the past 3 years, he has come over for tea, or I've gone to his place, because we both understood, without ever saying it plainly, that we needed that weekly anchor. I went to see him on a Wednesday afternoon, when I knew Nathan was at work and Renee had gone to the grocery store. I knocked on his door and he took one look at my face and said, "Come in, Dot. I'll put the kettle on." I told him what I had seen, the locked door, the young woman with the cash, the sounds at night. I told him about the way the conversation stopped when I entered a room, about the key that no longer worked in my own house. Harry listened without interrupting. He has always been a good listener. It's what made him a good teacher, I think. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment, turning his tea mug in his hands. Then he looked up at me with an expression that I recognized as the look of someone who has been waiting to say something difficult. "Dot," he said, "I've been wanting to talk to you for several weeks." I didn't know how. He had been noticing things from his front window. He is home most evenings, and his living room looks directly across the street at my front door, and for the past 3 months, he was certain it was at least 3 months, he had been watching people come and go from my house at hours that made no sense for house guests. Always after 10 o'clock at night, always carrying something, a suitcase, a backpack, a duffel bag. Never the same faces. They arrived by taxi or rideshare, never parking a car in the driveway the way family or friends would. Renee always opened the door before they could ring the bell, as if she was watching for them. Brief conversation at the door, money changing hands, then inside. In the mornings, early, sometimes before 6, he would watch them leave the same way, quietly, quickly, like people who had been told to be invisible. I counted at least 3 nights a week, Harry said, some weeks more. I did the math silently. If even half those guests were paying what I had seen that young woman pay, and from the look of that folded stack, it was at least $30 or $40 a night, Nathan and Renee had been collecting hundreds of dollars a week from my property, from my electricity, my water, my home. "There's something else," Harry said, and his voice had changed. Lower, more careful. He told me about 2 weeks ago. He had been at Corner Brew, the coffee shop 4 blocks from our street, having his usual mid-morning coffee. Renee had come in with a man he didn't know. 50s, well-dressed, dark suit, the kind of leather briefcase you see lawyers carry. They sat at the table next to Harry's. He didn't think Renee saw him, and they talked for nearly an hour. Harry wasn't trying to listen, but some things carried across the small space between the tables. He heard the phrase, mental competency evaluation. He heard the court process isn't complicated if you have a physician willing to sign. He heard private care facility, private room. He heard once power of attorney is established, the asset transfer is straightforward. I put my teacup down very carefully. My hands were steady. I was proud of that. "Are you certain about what you heard?" I asked him. "Dot, I'm 74 years old, not dead. I know what I heard." I looked out Harry's window at the house across the street. My house. Frank's apple tree was just visible over the roofline. White blooms against the gray October sky. They were not simply running an illegal business out of my home. They were building something far worse. A case. A file. A legal framework designed to take away not just my house, but my very right to exist in the world as a person capable of making her own decisions. They were going to paint me as a woman losing her mind. They were going to find a doctor to agree with them. And then they were going to put me somewhere out of the way while they lived in the house where Frank and I spent our whole lives together. The rage I felt in that moment was the cleanest emotion I have ever experienced. No confusion, no doubt, just absolute crystalline clarity. "Harry," I said, "I need to ask you a very large favor." The plan came together quickly, the way plans do when the stakes are clear and the mind is focused. I would tell Nathan and Renee that I was going to Seattle to visit Patricia for about 9 days. I would pack a bag, let Nathan drive me to the bus station if he insisted, and then come directly back to Harry's house. From Harry's spare bedroom on the 2nd floor, which looks directly across the street at my front door, I would watch. I would document. I would gather everything I needed. Before I did anything else, I called Gloria Hartman. Gloria and I met in 1996 at a continuing education class at the community center. She was learning to quilt. I was there for a pottery class, and we ended up at the same lunch table on the first day and talked for 3 hours. By the time she went back to law school in her early 40s and specialized in family and property law, we had already been friends for years. If there is anyone in my life I trust completely, without reservation, it is Gloria. I called her from Harry's kitchen with the door closed. I told her everything. When I finished, she was quiet for exactly 4 seconds. I counted. "Dot, what you're describing, the unlicensed rental operation, the unauthorized commercial use of your property, those are criminal offenses. Fraud, tax evasion, misuse of another person's property without consent. But those aren't what concern me most." A pause. If someone is consulting with a physician about a mental competency evaluation, and that consultation is connected to a power of attorney and an asset transfer, Dot, they are building a legal case to take everything you own and to remove your ability to stop them. Can it be stopped? Absolutely, but you need evidence, as much as possible, and you need to move before they do. Another pause, and when she spoke again, her voice had that particular quality it gets when she has shifted fully into lawyer mode. Steady, focused, already several steps ahead. "Dot, does Nathan have any existing power of attorney over you? Any documents you've signed?" "No, never." "Good. That's very good. Here is what I need you to do. That evening, I performed the best role of my life. At dinner, I set down my fork mid-meal and said quite casually, "You know, I've been thinking. Patricia has been asking me to come up to Seattle for months. I think I'll go next week. Stay maybe 8 or 9 days. I could use the change of scenery." The response was immediate. Nathan looked up from his plate with eyes that were too bright. Renee paused for just a fraction of a second, so brief I might have missed it a month ago, and then her smile spread wide, too enthusiastic. "Mom, that's wonderful. You absolutely should go. Right, Nathan?" Yes, definitely, Mom. You deserve a break. Don't worry about the house. We'll take care of everything." Don't worry about a thing. I looked at my son across the table where his father used to sit. I looked at the brightness in his eyes that was not joy but relief. I looked at the way his shoulders had dropped, the way he had exhaled without realizing it, as if a pressure valve had been released, and I thought, "You are going to regret this." "I'll need you to water the garden while I'm gone," I said pleasantly, "and please don't let the mail pile up." "Of course," Renee said. "Everything will be perfect when you get back." Perfect. She wanted everything to be perfect. She needed 9 days to make sure it was. The next morning, I packed my old suitcase, the one Frank and I had taken to New Orleans on our 25th anniversary, in full view of both of them. I called Patricia from the living room with the door open, loudly enough for Nathan to hear. "I'm heading out this morning. I should be there before lunch." Patricia, who knew every detail of the plan and had been furious on my behalf since I told her, played her part without missing a beat. Nathan insisted on driving me to the bus station. I told him it wasn't necessary. He insisted. Of course he did. He needed to see me go. At the terminal, he walked me to the platform. He hugged me, and for a moment, just a moment, I held my son and felt the shape of the boy he used to be. The 5-year-old who climbed Frank's apple tree. The 16-year-old who cried when the dog died and tried to pretend he hadn't. I held that memory for exactly as long as I could afford to. "Have a good trip, Mom. Call us when you get there." "I will, sweetheart," I said, and I walked into the terminal. I did not get on the bus. I waited 25 minutes in the terminal, watching the clock on the wall above the ticket counter. Then I went out through the east exit, hailed a cab, and gave the driver Harry's address. When I arrived, Harry was standing at the door with a cup of coffee already poured. "Ready?" he asked. I looked across the street at my house. The curtains in the front window shifted, Renee checking to make sure the street was clear. "Ready," I said, and I walked inside to begin watching my own home from a stranger's window, like a woman who had become a detective in her own life, because that is exactly what I had become. The spare bedroom on the second floor of Harry's house is a small, tidy room with cream-colored walls and a blue quilt on the single bed. Margaret had decorated it. Harry told me that the first night, quietly, the way people mention the dead when something reminds them. There was a small wooden chair by the window, and that chair became my post for the next several days. My observation point. My command center, if a 66-year-old woman in reading glasses and a cardigan can be said to have a command center. From that window, I could see everything. The front door of my house. The small porch with the 2 rocking chairs Frank built the summer Nathan turned 8. The front garden where my roses were past their bloom now, brown-edged and tired in the late October chill. Part of the living room was visible through the gap in the curtains. Just a slice, but enough. Enough to see movement. Enough to see light changing. Enough to see my life being used without my permission. The first day was quiet until evening. Nathan left for work at his usual time, 7:50, backing his blue sedan out of the driveway with the unhurried confidence of a man who believed everything was under control. Renee went out around 10 with a reusable grocery bag over her shoulder, the picture of a normal Tuesday morning. The house sat still and silent for most of the afternoon, and I sat in my chair and drank Harry's coffee and told myself to be patient. Patience has never been my greatest virtue. Frank used to say I approached problems like a woman who had already decided what the answer was and simply needed the world to catch up. He wasn't wrong, but I had learned something in 66 years that I hadn't known at 30. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is sit still and let the evidence come to you. It came at 6:15 that evening. A silver SUV pulled up in front of my house. A couple got out. I estimated early 30s, the woman in a bright yellow jacket, the man carrying a large rolling suitcase and wearing a backpack that looked stuffed past capacity. Tourist gear. Weekend gear. The gear of people who had booked somewhere to stay and were arriving to find it. Renee opened the front door before they reached the porch steps. I leaned forward in my chair. Harry, standing just behind me with his own cup of coffee, put a steady hand on the back of the chair. Renee greeted them with a wide, welcoming smile, a smile I recognized, though I had never seen it directed at strangers before. The man reached into his jacket and produced a folded envelope. He handed it to Renee. She opened it, counted the contents briefly, nodded with satisfaction, and gestured for them to come inside. My front door closed behind them. I sat back in my chair. Harry, I see it, Dot. That was cash, in an envelope. Yes. They booked my house. They are staying in my house tonight. In a room they are paying for. Harry said nothing. There was nothing to say. 20 minutes later, the light in the back bedroom, the one at the end of the hall, the one with the new lock, Frank's old office, came on. Yellow light through the curtains. The silhouettes of 2 people moving around, setting down bags, making themselves at home. Making themselves at home in my home. I thought about Frank's reading chair that was still in that room. I thought about the box of photographs on the shelf, our wedding pictures, Nathan's first Christmas, the trip to Maine in 1987 when it rained every single day and we laughed about it for years afterward. I thought about whether Renee had moved those things or simply pushed them aside to make room for paying guests. I pressed my hands flat against my thighs and breathed. You should try to sleep, Harry said gently. Tomorrow will be a long day. I'll sleep when I understand the full picture. He nodded as if he had expected exactly that answer and went downstairs to make us both more coffee. Over the next 2 days, I watched with the focused attention of someone who has nothing else to do and everything at stake. I watched Renee's routine take shape with a clarity that was almost admirable, in the cold, detached way that you can admire something terrible if you look at it long enough. She was organized, efficient. She had a system that had clearly been refined over months of practice. Mornings, strip the used rooms, start laundry, remake beds with fresh linens from the linen closet. My linen closet, the one where I keep the good sheets I bought at a white sale in 2019. Wipe down the bathrooms, empty wastebaskets, put a small wrapped soap on the edge of each sink, the kind you buy in bulk at the discount store. Light a candle in the hallway to cover the smell of multiple strangers living in a space designed for 3 people. Afternoons, respond to messages, I assumed, booking inquiries, confirmations, the back and forth of running a hospitality operation out of someone else's property without their knowledge. Evenings, welcome new guests, collect cash, smile, close the door. Nathan participated in the way that a person participates when they have told themselves they are not really responsible for what is happening. He changed the towels when Renee couldn't get to them. He made a run to the drugstore for extra toiletries. He kept the front porch swept and the driveway clear. He was, in every observable way, the maintenance staff for his wife's operation. And every night when the guests had settled and the house was quiet, I watched the 2 of them sit at my dining room table under the pendant light Frank had hung 20 years ago, and I watched them count money. Stacks of 20s, 50s, some hundreds, sorted into piles, moved to envelopes, recorded in Renee's notebook. Smiling, both of them smiling. I had to look away. On the 3rd evening I discovered the notebook, or rather, I remembered it, because I had already seen it once, hadn't I? Left on the kitchen counter for just a moment, flipped to a page of numbers, before Renee swept it up and tucked it under her arm with a smoothness that I had registered at the time as nothing in particular. I called Gloria that afternoon from Harry's kitchen. I need you to think back, she said, after I'd updated her on everything I'd observed. Is there anything inside that house, any document, any record of what they've been doing, that you could access without being seen? I thought about it. The shed, I said slowly. Frank's old workshop in the backyard. A small outbuilding with a padlock that had been on the door since 1998. I still had the key on my key ring. The same key ring I'd been carrying for 20 years, with the little brass lighthouse charm Nathan gave me one Mother's Day that I've never taken off. I told Gloria about the midnight meeting Harry had witnessed. Renee slipping out the back door with the man in the dark suit, both of them going to the shed, the light through the small window, the exchange of papers. Dot, Gloria said, and her voice was very careful now. If there are documents in that shed, I need you to photograph every single one of them, but only when you are certain you won't be seen. Do you understand? Don't take any risks. I've been managing risks since before you were born, Gloria. She laughed, a short, tight sound. I know. That's the only reason I'm not telling you not to do it at all. Thursday morning gave me my window. Nathan left at his regular time. Renee I watched from upstairs, loaded a basket of laundry, and went down to the basement. I could see the basement light come on through the small ground-level window on the side of the house. The guests who'd stayed Thursday night had already left before 7. The house was as quiet as it was going to get. I told Harry my plan. He tried to talk me out of it, in the gentle, persistent way of someone who knows they're going to lose the argument, but needs to register their objection for the record. Dot, if Renee comes outside and sees you, Renee is doing laundry. The basement steps take 45 seconds to climb. I'll hear the door before she reaches the yard. You are the most stubborn woman I have ever known, and I was married for 41 years. Is that a yes? He picked up his jacket. I'll watch the side door from the alley and whistle if I see movement. We went out through Harry's back gate and walked the length of the alley behind our properties. The morning was cold and pale, the sky the particular flat white of a Pacific Northwest November. Our footsteps were quiet on the packed dirt. I reached my own back gate. The key, the one I have had since 1998, turned smoothly in the padlock. Of course it did. This was my gate. This was my property. And yet, I entered my own backyard in a low crouch, moving from the gate to the cover of the hydrangea bushes along the fence line, feeling simultaneously ridiculous and completely clear-minded about what I was doing. The shed was 20 feet from the back door of the house. I covered the distance in a dozen quick steps and reached the padlock. 3 keys on my ring before I found the right one. My hands were not as steady as I would have liked, but they didn't fail me. The padlock opened. I slipped inside and pulled the door shut behind me. It smelled the way it had always smelled. Old wood. Motor oil from the lawn mower. A faint ghost of the pipe tobacco Frank had given up in 1995, but that somehow still lived in the walls of this small space. His tools hung on their pegboard, each one outlined in marker the way he'd done it so he could always see at a glance if anything was missing. His workbench ran the length of the back wall, and on top of that workbench, sitting in the space where Frank used to restore old furniture on weekend afternoons, was a gray metal box that did not belong there. Modern, clean, out of place among the weathered tools and dusty shelves like something that had been beamed in from a different world. I approached it, set my hands on either side of it, pressed the 2 side latches simultaneously. It opened. I want to try to describe what it feels like to open a box and find your own life being sold inside it. The cash was on top. American bills in mixed denominations, banded into groups. I counted quickly, moving my lips the way Frank always teased me about, and arrived at a number somewhere between $13,000 and $15,000. The money they had collected over months from the guests who slept in my rooms and used my hot water and left their coffee rings on my kitchen table. I set the cash aside carefully and looked at what was underneath. The first document was a rental listing agreement, printed from what appeared to be a property management platform, the kind that hosts short-term rentals online. My address was listed. My house was described: charming 4-bedroom craftsman home, updated bathrooms, full kitchen access, walking distance to shopping and transit. Perfect for families and groups. Under owner/operator, the name read Nathan Sullivan. I am the owner of that house. My name is on the deed. My name has been on that deed since 1986 when Frank and I signed the papers at the title company's office on a Tuesday afternoon with a bottle of cheap champagne waiting for us in the car. There was a footnote at the bottom of the document in small print. Legal title currently held by Dorothy A. Sullivan. Transfer in progress. Judicial proceedings pending. Transfer in progress. Judicial proceedings pending. The floor of the shed seemed to shift slightly under my feet. I kept reading. The second document had a clinic letterhead at the top, Westbrook Private Medical Associates, and was a psychological evaluation intake form. The patient name field had been filled in by hand. Dorothy Ann Sullivan, D.O.B., July 14, 1958. The reason for the evaluation: assessment of decision-making capacity and cognitive function. Family-initiated referral due to concerns regarding progressive cognitive decline. Progressive cognitive decline. I am 66 years old. I do the crossword puzzle every morning. I manage my own finances, maintain my own home, drive my own car, and have never Not once, not for a single moment, had any reason to question the clarity of my own mind. They were going to give me a reason. The appointment was scheduled. The date was 2 weeks away. Third document, a brochure printed on glossy paper. Sunrise Manor Private Residence, Premier Care for Older Adults. Monthly fee, $3,200. The section that had been highlighted in yellow read, Private Rooms with Secured Access. Specialized programming for residents with memory and cognitive challenges. Family peace of mind guaranteed. Family peace of mind. That phrase. I set the brochure down and picked up the fourth document. It was a power of attorney. Comprehensive, thorough, the kind that a real attorney had drafted carefully. It gave Nathan Sullivan full legal authority over my real property, my financial accounts, and my medical decisions. It was complete in every respect, except for my signature, which was, I now understood, where Dr. Forsythe came in. I found his name in the last item in the box, a single sheet of notepaper, folded once, covered in Renee's handwriting. Her handwriting, which I had seen on grocery lists and birthday cards and thank you notes for 3 years. Dr. Forsythe confirms light sedative can be administered morning of appointment. Signature obtained during period of reduced awareness. Witnesses arranged and compensated. Additional cost, $6,000. N. Confirms Thursday works for signing. N. Confirms. Nathan. My son had confirmed a date for them to drug me. I don't know how long I stood there in Frank's shed holding that piece of paper. It could have been 30 seconds. It felt like a year. Outside, I could hear the ordinary sounds of the neighborhood. A car passing on the street behind. Someone's wind chimes 2 houses down. A dog barking in the distance. The whole ordinary world continuing on while I stood in my husband's workshop and held the proof that my child had agreed to let someone sedate me so they could steal my signature. I took out my phone. I photographed every document, every page, the cash in its bands, the rental agreement with Nathan's name where mine should be, the intake form with my name in the patient field, the brochure with its highlighted promises of secured access, the power of attorney with its blank signature line, and last, the note in Renee's handwriting, the one that said N confirms. I put everything back exactly as I had found it. I closed the box. I walked back across the yard and out through the gate, and Harry was waiting for me in the alley with his hands in his jacket pockets, and one look at my face told him everything he needed to know. Dot. Not here, I said quietly. Inside. We sat at Harry's kitchen table, and I showed him the photographs one by one. I watched his face as he swiped through them, the careful stillness of a man who has decided not to react until he has seen everything. When he reached the last image, Renee's handwritten note, he set the phone down on the table very gently and folded his hands. This is a criminal conspiracy, he said. This isn't a gray area or a family dispute or a misunderstanding about boundaries. This is a deliberate, coordinated plan to defraud you and take away your freedom. I know. You need to call Gloria right now. I know that too. I dialed. Gloria picked up on the second ring. I talked for 11 minutes without stopping. When I finished, the silence on her end lasted long enough that I checked the screen to make sure the call hadn't dropped. Dot. Her voice was controlled, professional, and underneath it I could hear something that in anyone other than Gloria Hartman I would call barely contained fury. What you have just described is elder financial abuse, conspiracy to commit fraud, conspiracy to unlawfully deprive a person of their liberty, and procurement of fraudulent medical documentation. Any one of those is a serious crime. Together, she stopped. Together, these people were going to destroy your life and call it care. I need to know how to stop them completely, Gloria, not just slow them down. Stop them. Here is what we're going to do. She laid it out in the precise, sequential way she has always organized problems, the way that made her one of the most effective attorneys I have ever watched work. Sunday, I would come to her office. She had a forensic psychologist she trusted completely, not someone affiliated with Westbrook Private Medical or anyone connected to Raymond Forsythe, who would conduct an independent evaluation of my cognitive function. We would have a certified, court-admissible document establishing my full mental competency before Renee's appointment date could arrive. Sunday also, a notary named Walter Briggs, who had handled Frank's estate and who Gloria trusted absolutely, would be present. I would sign a new power of attorney, one that revoked any existing authority and prevented any future authority from being established without my direct, witnessed, uncoerced consent. I would update my will. I would put legal protections around every asset I owned. "And Renee and Nathan?" I asked. "That," Gloria said, "is where we set the trap." She explained it. The Municipal Housing Authority had an inspection division. An anonymous complaint about an unlicensed short-term rental operation would generate an inspection order signed by a judge. The inspector would arrive unannounced, and the most effective time for that arrival would be on a night when the house was full. "Renee runs more guests on weekends," I said. "Then we schedule the inspection for a Thursday night. Enough activity to constitute clear evidence, close enough to Friday that their operation is in full swing. And I go back to the house. Yes, you go back Monday, as if you've returned from Seattle early. You act as if you know nothing. You give them 3 days of normal, and on Thursday night, Inspector Kowalski knocks on the door." I looked out Harry's kitchen window. Across the street, the light in my living room had come on. I could see Renee's shadow moving behind the curtains, tending to someone else's comfort in my house. "Gloria," I says, "there is one more thing I need to tell you. Something I heard." I told her about what I had overheard through Nathan and Renee's bedroom door on the night I planned to return, the conversation I knew was coming, the confirmation I had not yet received but was now entirely prepared to listen for. "If they discuss the plan out loud while you're in the house," Gloria said slowly, "and you hear them, I will remember every word." Another pause. "Dot, you have handled this with more precision and more courage than most people half your age would manage." "Frank always said I was difficult," I told her. "I'm starting to think he meant it as a compliment." That Friday night was the night that showed me the full scale of what had been happening in my home. Harry had warned me that Fridays were different, bigger. He was not wrong. By 8 o'clock, I had counted 9 people entering my front door. Not one at a time, in groups now, a couple here, 3 women together there, a lone businessman with a rolling carry-on, a pair of older men who looked like they were in Portland for a conference. 9 strangers inside the walls of the home where Frank and I made every decision about our lives together. Renee moved through it all like a conductor, professional, warm, unrecognizable as the woman who had made me coffee every morning for the past year. Nathan helped with bags, pointed people toward rooms, smiled the smile of someone who has learned to be comfortable in a role that should horrify him. I sat in Harry's chair and watched and felt the cold, settled certainty of someone who has already decided what happens next. At 11:50, Harry touched my shoulder gently. "Dot, the side door." I looked. Renee was slipping out the side door of my house, the door that opens to the narrow passage between the house and the fence, the one that leads to the backyard. Behind her was a man in a dark suit with a leather briefcase, moving quietly, his face turned away from the street. The man from Corner Brew. They crossed the yard to Frank's shed. The light came on inside. Through the small window I could see shadows, bent over the workbench, passing papers back and forth. 23 minutes. Then the light went off, and the man left through the back gate, and Renee walked back into the house through the side door as if she had simply stepped out for some air. Harry and I looked at each other. "That was Dr. Forsythe?" Harry asked. "Or his lawyer, or both?" "They're moving faster." "Yes," I said, "which means so do we." I returned to my house on Monday evening. I had rehearsed what I would say, how I would hold my face, what a woman looks like when she has been away visiting her sister and has come home happy and tired and completely unsuspecting. I had rehearsed it in Harry's spare bedroom until I could produce it without effort. Nathan opened the door. The surprise on his face lasted about 1 second before he rearranged it into welcome. "Mom, we weren't expecting you until tomorrow. I missed home," I said simply and stepped inside. Renee appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel. Her smile arrived perfectly on cue. "Dot, how is Seattle? How's Patricia?" "Wonderful. She spoiled me completely." I set my bag down and looked around the living room. Clean, tidy, not a trace of the 9 strangers who had occupied it 3 days ago. Renee had been thorough. "The house looks beautiful. You two took such good care of it." "Of course," Renee said, and something behind her eyes shifted almost imperceptibly. Relief. "We wanted everything perfect for your return." I had tea. I told invented stories about restaurants Patricia and I had visited, walks along the waterfront, a bookshop I claimed to have spent an afternoon in. Nathan and Renee listened and asked questions and smiled, and I smiled back, and we were all four of us, counting Frank's ghost somewhere in the walls of that room, performing for each other in the house he built. That night I lay awake and listened. Just after 11, from behind their closed bedroom door, I heard Nathan's voice, low, tense, urgent. "Do you think she suspects anything?" Renee immediately. "No, she's exactly the same. She doesn't suspect a thing. The plan is still on." And Forsyth, "Everything is coordinated. The appointment is Friday morning. We give her the sedative in her breakfast tea. We tell her we're taking her for the routine checkup. By the time she understands what she's signed, it will be registered. We'll have full control." A silence. Then Nathan, in a voice I have carried with me every day since. "And after that?" And Renee, flat and certain and without any hesitation at all. "After that, we place her. Sunrise Manor already has a room. We visit once a month. The house is ours." I walked back to my bedroom in the dark and sat on the edge of my bed. I was not crying. I was past crying. I was thinking about Thursday, about Inspector Kowalski, about Gloria's voice on the phone saying we set the trap. Wednesday evening, Renee showed me a printed brochure. "Dot, I found this wonderful senior wellness center that does free health screenings. I made you an appointment for Friday morning at 10, just a routine checkup. Doesn't that sound nice?" I looked at the brochure. I looked at her face. "That's very thoughtful of you, Renee," I said warmly. "I haven't had a checkup in ages." Her shoulders dropped with relief so visible it was almost painful. "Wonderful. I'll drive you." "I'd like that," I said. And I went upstairs to my room and texted Gloria a single line. "They confirmed Friday. Thursday inspection must happen. I'm ready." Her reply came back in under a minute. "Kowalski confirmed for 9 p.m. Police on standby." "You've got this, Dot." I turned off my phone. I looked out the window at Frank's apple tree, silver in the moonlight. "I've got this," I thought. "For you, for us, for this house. Thursday can't come fast enough." Thursday arrived the way important days always do, looking exactly like any other day until it doesn't. The morning was ordinary. I made coffee. I scrambled eggs. Nathan ate quickly and left for work at 7:50, same as always. Renee moved through the kitchen with her efficient morning routine, wiping counters, checking her phone, writing something in that notebook I had photographed page by page from Harry's window. We exchanged the small pleasantries of people who share a house. The weather, whether we needed anything from the store, whether I had slept well. "Very well," I told her. "Best sleep I've had in weeks." She smiled and said she was glad. I sat at the kitchen table after she went upstairs and looked at my hands wrapped around my coffee mug. Frank's mug, the heavy blue ceramic one from the trip to Vermont in 2003. And I breathed slowly and reminded myself of everything that was already in motion. The documents Gloria had filed. The evaluation from Dr. Carol Hensley, the forensic psychologist, certifying my complete and unimpaired cognitive function. The new power of attorney. The updated will. Every legal protection Gloria could build around me had already been built. All that remained was tonight. By late afternoon, I noticed Renee moving differently, more focused. There was a subtle acceleration in her movements. The way she changed the sheets in the back bedroom, restocked the bathroom shelves, arranged the extra towels in the hall closet. She had lit the vanilla candle on the entry table, the one she used when she wanted the house to smell welcoming rather than lived in. She was preparing for a full house. Around 5 o'clock, my phone vibrated on the nightstand. A text from Gloria. "Kowalski briefed and ready. 9 p.m. Officers will wait 1 block east until called. Stay in your room when the bell rings. Let it unfold. Trust the plan." I read it twice. Then I put the phone in my cardigan pocket and went downstairs to help Renee set the table for dinner, because that is what an unsuspecting woman would do. And I was still, until 9 o'clock, an unsuspecting woman. The guests began arriving at 6:45. I was in the living room with a book open in my lap, actually reading about 2 words per page, if I'm honest, when I heard the first knock. Renee answered with that practiced professional warmth, and I listened to the sounds of arrival, rolling suitcases on the hardwood, the exchange of pleasantries, the soft, efficient transaction of cash that Renee had perfected over months. I did not look up from my book. Nathan arrived home from work at 6:55. He set his bag by the stairs the way he always did and came into the living room and asked me how my day had been. And I told him fine. and he nodded and went to find Renee, and I listened to the low conversation between them in the hallway. Not words, just the particular murmur of two people coordinating, confirming, making sure their operation was running on schedule. By 8:30, I had counted, without appearing to count, 8 guests in my house. They moved through the common areas with the comfortable ease of people who had paid for the right to be somewhere. A couple in the kitchen making tea, 2 young women on the living room sofa scrolling their phones, a man I recognized as arriving alone setting up a laptop at the dining room table where Nathan and Renee counted their money on weekend nights. My dining room table, the one Frank refinished by hand the summer of 1999, sanding it down to bare wood and restaining it a shade he called honest oak. I excused myself at 8:45. I'm tired from all the traveling. I think I'll turn in early. Of course, Dot. Sleep well, Renee said from the kitchen, and I climbed the stairs to my room and closed the door and sat on the edge of my bed and watched the minutes move on my bedside clock. 8:52, 8:57, 9:03, and then the doorbell. It rang the way official things ring, not the tentative 2-note press of a visitor hoping they have the right house. A firm, deliberate, sustained ring that said I am here and I am not going away. I heard the sounds downstairs change immediately, the murmur of guests going quiet. Footsteps, Nathan's, heavier than Renee's, crossing the entry, the door opening. Can I help you? Bill Kowalski, Portland Housing Authority. I have an inspection order for this property signed by Judge Patricia Wren of Multnomah County. I need access to the premises. Silence, the particular silence of a person buying themselves 3 seconds to decide how to respond. Is there a problem, officer? Inspector, we received a complaint regarding the operation of an unlicensed short-term rental business at this address. This inspection order authorizes me to examine the property and verify compliance with Municipal Housing Code. I have a colleague with me. There must be some misunderstanding. Renee's voice now, appearing from wherever she had been, smooth and immediate. This is a private residence. We're not operating any kind of business here. Then you won't have any objection to letting me verify that. A pause. Of course, Nathan said. The defeat was already in his voice, beneath the attempt at composure. Please come in. I got up from the bed. I moved to my door and opened it 1 inch. Enough to see the top of the stairs. Enough to hear clearly. Inspector Kowalski's voice was even and professional and carried the specific authority of someone who has done this many times and is not impressed by anything he is about to find. I heard him step into the entry. I heard his footsteps pause. Are these individuals residents of the property? A beat of silence that lasted too long. One of the guests, a man's voice, slightly uncertain, answered before Nathan could. No, sir. I booked a room online. I've been here since yesterday. What did you pay per night? $38. I closed my eyes for 1 moment. Then I opened them and straightened my cardigan and opened my bedroom door fully. I came down the stairs slowly, one hand on the railing, the way a 66-year-old woman who has been asleep comes downstairs when she hears unexpected noise. I had practiced this too. The unhurried pace, the slight confusion in my expression that was not quite confusion, but could be read as it by anyone who expected to see it. Every face in the room turned toward me. The 8 guests scattered around my living room and entry in various states of bewilderment. Inspector Kowalski, a solid, calm man in his mid-40s in a municipal uniform, clipboard in hand, and his younger colleague with a camera, and Nathan and Renee standing together near the hallway entrance, and the expressions on their faces when they saw me were the most honest things I had seen from either of them in months. Pure, undiluted, terror, not surprise, not confusion, terror. Because in that one unguarded second, before either of them could reconstruct their composure, they understood that something had gone catastrophically wrong with their plan, and they did not yet know how wrong, or how long I had known, or what was already in motion behind the scenes that they could not see. That second was worth everything. Good evening, I said pleasantly. I heard the doorbell. Is everything all right? Kowalski turned to me with the measured courtesy of a professional. Ma'am, are you a resident of this property? I am. I'm Dorothy Sullivan. I own this house. Mrs. Sullivan. He nodded respectfully. I'm here on a housing inspection order regarding an alleged unlicensed rental operation at this address. Were you aware that rooms in your home have been rented to paying guests? I let the silence breathe for exactly the right number of seconds. I looked at Nathan. I looked at Renee. I looked at my son, who had stood in this entry with his father and me and gone trick-or-treating from this door and learned to drive on the street outside and come home to this house every Thanksgiving for 33 years. I looked at my son, and I watched him look at me, and I watched the moment when he understood, fully, completely, without any remaining ambiguity, that I was not the woman he had been deceiving. "No, Inspector," I said. "I had no knowledge of any rental operation. This is the first I'm hearing of it." Renee took a step toward me. "Dot, Mrs. Sullivan," I said, and my voice was so quiet and so steady that she stopped moving. What followed was thorough and methodical and took the better part of 2 hours. Kowalski and his colleague moved through the house room by room. They documented everything. Occupied rooms with non-resident guests and their luggage. The back bedroom. Frank's room. The locked room, with its fresh linens and its small wrapped soaps and its complete absence of any of Frank's belongings, which I noticed with a cold spike of pain and filed away for later. The linen closet stocked far beyond the needs of a 3-person household. The bathroom with its multiple sets of toiletries. The extra towels stacked in the hallway. Kowalski's colleague photographed everything. The inspector wrote in his clipboard with the steady hand of someone building an airtight record. Renee attempted to explain twice. The guests were friends. They were family visiting from out of town. The inspector asked each time whether money had changed hands, and each time Nathan or Renee began a sentence about voluntary contributions for expenses, and each time Kowalski stopped them with the same patient, immovable response. Collecting money in exchange for lodging is a commercial transaction regardless of what you call it. One by one, at the inspector's request, the guests confirmed what they already knew. They had booked online. They had paid nightly rates. They had no personal relationship with the property owners. Nathan stopped trying to explain somewhere around the 3rd room. He stood in the hallway with his arms at his sides and his face the color of old chalk, and said nothing more. Renee kept her chin up longer. I will give her that. She maintained the posture of someone who believed they could still talk their way out of something, right up until the moment Kowalski read the relevant sections of the Portland Municipal Code aloud from his clipboard and itemized the documentation required for a legal short-term rental operation. Commercial license, fire safety certificate, zoning compliance letter, tax registration, health and sanitation inspection, and asked one final time which of those they possessed. The silence answered for them. "Mrs. Sullivan," Kowalski said, turning to me with the particular courtesy that officials reserve for the wronged party in a situation, "the guests will need to vacate the property tonight. We'll give everyone 30 minutes to collect their belongings. Your son and daughter-in-law will receive official citation notices and will be required to appear before a municipal judge within 10 business days. The fine for operating an unlicensed short-term rental at this scale begins at $10,000. He paused. "I also need to inform you that this report will be forwarded to the Oregon Department of Revenue, as undeclared rental income is a separate matter for the tax authorities." "Thank you, Inspector," I said. "I appreciate your thoroughness. I recommend consulting with your attorney, Mrs. Sullivan. You have significant grounds for a civil damages claim." "I already have an attorney. She's very good." He nodded once, the small professional nod of someone who is satisfied with how an evening has gone, and went to oversee the guest's departure. The next 30 minutes were a particular kind of chaos. The guests moved through the house, gathering their things with the uncomfortable speed of people caught in the middle of someone else's disaster, apologetic, bewildered, casting uncertain looks at Nathan and Renee as they passed. One of the women asked Renee quietly about a refund. Renee, with the inspector watching, opened her purse and counted out the bills without a word. Nathan stood near the window and did not move. When the last rolling suitcase had gone down the porch steps and the front door had closed for the final time, Kowalski handed me a copy of the inspection report, shook my hand with genuine respect, and left with his colleague. And then it was just the 3 of us. My house, my living room. The pendant light Frank hung 20 years ago, casting its familiar warm circle over the dining table. The quiet that follows the departure of 9 strangers who had no business being there. I sat down in Frank's armchair. Not the one from the storage room. That one was gone, I had noticed, cleared out to make room for guests. His other chair, the one from the living room, the low wingback with the worn armrests that he had refused to reupholster because he said it had taken 30 years to get comfortable and he wasn't starting over. I sat in my husband's chair in my husband's house, and I looked at my son and my daughter-in-law, and I waited. Renee spoke first. She always spoke first. I had learned that about her. Dot, I know how this looks, but we had reasons. Real reasons. The debt was— Stop. She stopped. I'm not interested in reasons tonight, Renee. Tonight I am interested in truth. I looked at them both steadily. I found the box in the shed. The change in Renee's face was instantaneous, a contraction, like something pulling inward. Nathan looked at his wife. What box? The gray metal box on Frank's workbench. I kept my voice level. With the cash, and the rental contract with your name on it as owner of a house that belongs to me, and the psychological evaluation form with my name in the patient field, and the brochure for Sunrise Manor, and the power of attorney you had drawn up and waiting for my signature. I paused. And Renee's note about Dr. Forsythe, and the sedative, and the witnesses she had arranged. Nathan turned to look at Renee very slowly. What note? His voice was careful in a way that told me the carefulness was new. Renee, what note? Nathan, what note about a sedative? And here is where the story became something I had not entirely anticipated, something that cracked down the middle in a way that changed its shape completely. Renee's expression shifted. For the first time since I had come down those stairs, the calculation left her face, and something rawer took its place. Not remorse, not yet, maybe not ever, but the specific look of someone whose architecture has been exposed. It was a contingency, she said. Just in case. In case what? Nathan's voice had risen past careful now. In case she didn't agree? In case she figured out what we were doing and said no? You were going to drug my mother? It was Forsythe's suggestion. He said it was standard procedure for elderly patients who— She is not a patient. She is my mother. Nathan took a step back from Renee. A physical step. The distance between them changed in that moment in a way that I understood would not close again. I knew about the rentals. I agreed to that. I told myself it wasn't hurting anyone, that you were asleep, that it was just— I told myself a lot of things. He was breathing unevenly now. But I never knew about this. The evaluation form, the nursing home, He stopped. I never agreed to this. You knew we needed control of the asset. I knew we needed money. I did not know you were planning to have my mother sedated and committed. The silence that followed was the most complicated silence I have ever sat in the middle of. I looked at my son. I thought about the boy who had climbed Frank's apple tree at age 7 and gotten stuck 20 feet up and cried until Frank talked him down branch by branch. The boy who had held my hand at his father's funeral with a grip so tight it had left a mark. The man who had stood at that bus station and watched me go with relief in his eyes. Relief that I was choosing to believe was not as calculated as it looked, that perhaps, in some part of him, was genuinely conflicted. Perhaps. I was not ready to decide. Nathan, I said quietly, whether you knew every detail or not, you changed the lock on Frank's room without asking me. You stood in that kitchen every morning while strangers slept upstairs, and you looked me in the eye and said nothing. You drove me to that bus station and watched me go. He had no answer for that. You participated, and participation has consequences. I set my phone on the dining table. I opened Gloria's contact and pressed call and put it on speaker. Gloria's voice came into the room clear and professional and entirely without warmth. Nathan Sullivan, Renee Sullivan, my name is Gloria Hartman. I am the attorney representing Dorothy Ann Sullivan. I'm calling to inform you that as of this morning, the following legal actions are in effect. She read the list. The revocation of any existing or prospective power of attorney bearing Nathan Sullivan's name. The certified declaration of Dorothy Sullivan's full cognitive and legal competency, signed by forensic psychologist Dr. Carol Hensley and filed with Multnomah County Court. The updated will, removing Nathan Sullivan as beneficiary due to documented fraudulent conduct. The restraining order, preventing either Nathan or Renee Sullivan from accessing Dorothy Sullivan's financial accounts, property records, or medical information without prior court approval. Additionally, Gloria continued, the full evidence package, photographic documentation of fraudulent documents, financial records, witness statements, and Inspector Kowalski's report filed this evening, has been submitted to the Multnomah County District Attorney's Office and to the Oregon Medical Board regarding Dr. Raymond Forsythe. Renee sat down. I don't think she chose to. I think her legs simply stopped holding her. You have until noon on Saturday to vacate the property, Gloria said. If you have not left by that time, Mrs. Sullivan will request law enforcement assistance with the removal. Do you understand what I have communicated? Nathan said, yes. Renee said nothing. Good evening, Gloria said, and the line went quiet. What followed was not a movie scene. There were no dramatic speeches, no final confessions, no catharsis that arrived neatly packaged and resolving. Real confrontations aren't like that. Real confrontations are messy and exhausting and leave you feeling emptied out rather than triumphant. Renee tried once more. She straightened in her chair and looked at me with eyes that had gone hard and said that I had no right to evict them, that they had been living in this house for over a year, that they had legal standing as residents, and she would fight it. Fight it, I said. Gloria would welcome the opportunity to present the full evidence package in open court. The hardness in Renee's eyes flickered. Went out. Nathan stood up. He walked to the entry table and stood there with his back to us for a long moment. Then he said very quietly, I'll start packing tonight. He didn't look at me when he said it. He didn't look at Renee. He just set it to the wall and then walked upstairs, and I heard his footsteps in the hallway, and then the sound of the guest room door. Not his old bedroom, not Frank's office, but the room at the back, opening and closing. Renee sat for another few minutes. I did not try to fill the silence. Eventually she stood, gathered her purse from the kitchen counter with the automated movement of someone running on the last reserves of composure, and went upstairs without a word. I remained in Frank's chair. The house was very quiet. Outside, a car passed on Maple Street. The refrigerator cycled on with its familiar hum. The clock on the mantel, the one Frank's mother had given us as a wedding gift, marked the seconds with its steady, unhurried tick. I sat in my husband's chair in my house, and I let myself feel, for the first time in weeks, the full weight of what had happened. Not the logistics of it, not the legal steps or the strategic moves, the human weight of it. My son had decided my life was an obstacle. My son had looked at everything Frank and I had built and seen an asset to be managed. My son had agreed, in whatever limited, partial, tell-yourself-a-story way, to a plan that would have ended with me in a locked room in a private facility, visited once a month to keep up appearances. I cried. I want to be honest about that. I sat in Frank's chair in the quiet house, and I cried in a way I hadn't cried since the morning after he died. That particular grief that has no bottom to it, that keeps finding new depths just when you think you've reached the last one. But here is what I also felt, underneath the grief, steady as the foundation of that old house. I was still here. I was still myself. They had not taken a single thing from me that could not be recovered or rebuilt. The house was mine. My name was on the deed, and it was going to stay there. My mind was clear and certified and documented and protected. I was still standing. They were gone by 10 o'clock on Saturday morning. I watched from the kitchen window as they loaded their car. 4 large suitcases, 2 boxes, a lamp Renee had brought when they moved in. Nathan made 3 trips. Renee made 2. They did not speak to each other that I could see. The distance that had opened between them Thursday night had not closed. On his last trip downstairs, Nathan stopped in the kitchen doorway. He looked older than he had 2 days ago. Grayer somehow, even in his face. The particular aging that happens when a person is forced to see themselves clearly and does not like what they find. Mom, Nathan, he stopped. I know you want to say something, I told him. And I know part of what you would say is true, but I am not ready to hear it yet. When I am, I will let you know. He stood there for another moment. Then he nodded, a small broken nod, and picked up the last box and walked out the front door. I heard his car start. I heard it pull away from the curb. And then I heard silence, the deep, complete silence of a house that belongs to itself again. 6 weeks after Nathan and Renee left, Gloria called on a Tuesday afternoon. I was in my new studio, Frank's old office, the room they had locked and rented to strangers, which I had reclaimed and repainted a warm pale yellow, and filled with a second-hand easel, and 3 dozen tubes of paint I had been collecting slowly since I retired, the hobby I had always said I would start someday, and kept not starting. I was attempting a painting of the apple tree. It was not going well, technically, but I found that it didn't need to go well to be worth doing. The medical board issued its decision on Raymond Forsythe this morning. I set down my brush. Gloria's voice had that particular quality it gets when she is delivering news she has been waiting to deliver. They have revoked his medical license, permanently. The investigation uncovered 3 prior patients, all elderly, all referred by family members seeking conservatorship, where Forsyth had provided documentation that the board determined was fabricated or medically unsupported. Your case was the one that finally had enough documented evidence to make it stick. He won't be able to do this to anyone else. Not with a medical license, no. A pause. The district attorney's office has also indicated they are moving forward with criminal charges against Forsyth. Conspiracy, fraud, elder abuse. The DA told me personally she intends to prosecute fully. And Renee? Renee is facing criminal charges, elder financial abuse, conspiracy to commit fraud, unlawful use of another's property. Her attorney is negotiating, but the evidence is substantial. She will not escape this cleanly. I looked out the studio window at the apple tree. Late November now, bare branches against a white sky. But I had watched it long enough to know that in 4 months, those branches would be covered in white blossoms again. Frank had known that too, every winter. He had planted a tree that knew how to come back. Nathan? Gloria paused in the way she does when she is choosing her words carefully. Nathan has cooperated fully with the district attorney. He provided testimony against both Renee and Forsyth. He has accepted a civil settlement, significant financial penalties, formal acknowledgement of wrongdoing, and a 10-year restraining order from your property and finances. Another pause. The DA has agreed not to pursue criminal charges against him in exchange for his cooperation. I thought about that for a long moment. Is that the right outcome? I asked. Not of Gloria, really. Of the room. Of the apple tree. Legally, it's a reasonable outcome, Gloria said carefully. Personally, that's not a legal question. No, I agreed. It isn't. 3 weeks later, a letter arrived. Plain white envelope. My name in handwriting I had known for 38 years. The same handwriting that had signed birthday cards and grocery lists and the note he had left on the kitchen counter the morning of Frank's funeral that said simply, "I love you, Mom. I'll be there in an hour." I sat at the kitchen table with the envelope in my hands for a long time before I opened it. Mom, I've rewritten this letter 11 times. I'm not going to rewrite it again because I don't think the 12th version is going to be any more worthy of you than the other 11. I know I don't deserve to explain myself. I'm going to try anyway, not because it changes anything, but because you deserve to know what was true and what wasn't. I agreed to the rental operation because we were drowning. $35,000 of debt and a bank that had already sent 2 notices. Renee said it would be temporary. I told myself you weren't being hurt because you didn't know. I told myself a lot of things. None of them were good enough. But Mom, I need you to know. The rest of it. The evaluation, the nursing home, Forsyth, I did not know. I know that doesn't make me innocent. I know that living under the same roof and choosing not to look too closely at what my wife was doing is its own kind of guilt. I know that. Renee and I are separated. I don't say that to earn sympathy. I say it because I couldn't stay with someone who looked at my mother and saw a problem to be managed. When I understood completely what she had planned, not the version she'd told me, the actual plan, I couldn't unknow it. I can't be the person who knew that and stayed. I'm living in a studio apartment in Northeast Portland. I'm working. I'm paying down the debt that started all of this, slowly, on my own. I go to therapy on Thursday afternoons. I'm not writing to ask for forgiveness. I know better than to think forgiveness is something you ask for. I think it might be something that happens, or doesn't, on its own timeline, on your terms, not mine. I'm writing because you are my mother, because Dad loved you more than anything he ever loved in his life, and he chose you with everything he had. Because you deserve to know that your son is ashamed of what he did, and is trying to become someone who is less capable of doing it again. And because I still love you. I have no right to say that. I'm saying it anyway. Your son, Nathan. I folded the letter along its original creases. I carried it to the bookshelf in the living room, the shelf where I keep the things that matter most. Frank's watch, the lighthouse keychain Nathan gave me one Mother's Day, still on my key ring, the small framed photograph from our wedding, Frank and I on the steps of the church, laughing at something I can no longer remember, but that must have been wonderful because our faces look like people who have just been given exactly what they wanted. I put Nathan's letter on that shelf, not because I had forgiven him, not yet, maybe not for a long time, but because it belonged with the other things that were true. It is late April now, and Frank's apple tree is in full bloom. I can see it from the studio window, Branches loaded with white blossoms, ridiculous and extravagant and exactly as reliable as he always was. Every April without fail. I am 3 weeks into a painting that still isn't going well technically, but that I love more than anything I've made so far, because every time I look at it, I see something I hadn't noticed before. The way the light catches the upper branches differently than the lower ones. The way the blossoms cluster toward the south side where the light is best. Frank would have known why that was. He knew things about trees the way he knew things about most living creatures, patiently, without needing to be impressive about it. Harry came for dinner last Tuesday. He brought a bottle of Oregon Pinot Noir he'd been saving for a special occasion and refused to tell me what the occasion was. We sat on the back porch after dinner in the cool evening air and looked at the apple tree and didn't talk for a long time, which is one of the real luxuries of knowing someone well enough to be silent with them. "Are you going to answer his letter?" Harry asked eventually. "I don't know yet. That seems like the right answer. My therapist says forgiveness isn't something you do for the other person. It's something you do for yourself. To put down the weight." Harry considered this with the careful attention he gives to things worth thinking about. "Are you putting it down?" I looked at the apple tree, at the blossoms Frank planted into the ground 33 years ago in the form of a sapling because he said every boy should grow up with a tree to climb. Nathan had climbed that tree. He had gotten stuck in it once and cried until his father talked him down. He had sat in its branches on summer evenings reading comic books when he was 9. He had carved his initials into the bark. I found them once, hidden on the north side, NS plus KW for some girl from middle school whose name I've long forgotten. The tree was still here, still blooming, still keeping its promise regardless of everything that had happened around it. "I'm learning," I said. "Slowly, but I'm learning." Harry nodded and poured the last of the Pinot Noir, and we sat there together in the evening quiet of Maple Street while the blossoms drifted down through the still air and landed wherever they chose to land. And I thought about Frank, and I thought about Nathan, and I thought about the 66-year-old woman I saw in the mirror every morning, the one with the steadier eyes than she used to have, the one who had been shown the worst that love can do when it sours into greed, and who had stood in the middle of it and held her ground. I thought about what it means to own something. Not the legal version, not the deed and title version. The real version. The version that says, "I am still here. This is still mine. You did not take it." My name is Dorothy Sullivan. I am 66 years old, and I live in a white wood frame house on Maple Street in Portland, Oregon. I made my coffee this morning in the kitchen where Frank used to make pancakes on Sundays. I am painting a picture of the apple tree he planted the year our son turned 5. I have been betrayed by someone I loved. I have been underestimated by people who should have known better. I have been treated like a problem to be managed, an obstacle to be removed, a signature waiting to be taken. And I am still here, still myself, still standing in the house we built. That after everything, that is enough. That is more than enough. I'll be there in an hour. I sat at the kitchen table with the envelope in my hands for a long time before I opened it. "Mom, I've rewritten this letter 11 times. I'm not going to rewrite it again because I don't think the 12th version is going to be any more worthy of you than the other 11. I know I don't deserve to explain myself. I'm going to try anyway, not because it changes anything, but because you deserve to know what was true and what wasn't. I agreed to the rental operation because we were drowning. $35,000 of debt and a bank that had already sent 2 notices. Renee said it would be temporary. I told myself you weren't being hurt because you didn't know. I told myself a lot of things. None of them were good enough. But Mom, I need you to know. The rest of it. The evaluation, the nursing home, Forsyth. I did not know. I know that doesn't make me innocent. I know that living under the same roof and choosing not to look too closely at what my wife was doing is its own kind of guilt. I know that. Renee and I are separated. I don't say that to earn sympathy. I say it because I couldn't stay with someone who looked at my mother and saw a problem to be managed. When I understood completely what she had planned, not the version she'd told me, the actual plan, I couldn't unknow it. I can't be the person who knew that and stayed. I'm living in a studio apartment in Northeast Portland. I'm working. I'm paying down the debt that started all of this, slowly, on my own. I go to therapy on Thursday afternoons. I'm not writing to ask for forgiveness. I know better than to think forgiveness is something you ask for. I think it might be something that happens, or doesn't, on its own timeline. On your terms, not mine. I'm writing because you are my mother, because Dad loved you more than anything he ever loved in his life, and he chose you with everything he had. Because you deserve to know that your son is ashamed of what he did, and is trying to become someone who is less capable of doing it again. And because I still love you. I have no right to say that. I'm saying it anyway. Your son, Nathan. I folded the letter along its original creases. I carried it to the bookshelf in the living room, the shelf where I keep the things that matter most. Frank's watch, the lighthouse keychain Nathan gave me one Mother's Day, still on my key ring. The small framed photograph from our wedding, Frank and I on the steps of the church, laughing at something I can no longer remember, but that must have been wonderful, because our faces look like people who have just been given exactly what they wanted. I put Nathan's letter on that shelf, not because I had forgiven him, not yet, maybe not for a long time, but because it belonged with the other things that were true. It is late April now, and Frank's apple tree is in full bloom. I can see it from the studio window, branches loaded with white blossoms, ridiculous and extravagant and exactly as reliable as he always was. Every April without fail. I am 3 weeks into a painting that still isn't going well technically, but that I love more than anything I've made so far, because every time I look at it, I see something I hadn't noticed before. The way the light catches the upper branches differently than the lower ones. The way the blossoms cluster toward the south side where the light is best. Frank would have known why that was. He knew things about trees the way he knew things about most living creatures, patiently, without needing to be impressive about it. Harry came for dinner last Tuesday. He brought a bottle of Oregon Pinot Noir he'd been saving for a special occasion and refused to tell me what the occasion was. We sat on the back porch after dinner in the cool evening air and looked at the apple tree and didn't talk for a long time, which is one of the real luxuries of knowing someone well enough to be silent with them. "Are you going to answer his letter?" Harry asked eventually. "I don't know yet. That seems like the right answer. My therapist says forgiveness isn't something you do for the other person. It's something you do for yourself. To put down the weight." Harry considered this with the careful attention he gives to things worth thinking about. "Are you putting it down?" I looked at the apple tree, at the blossoms Frank planted into the ground 33 years ago in the form of a sapling because he said every boy should grow up with a tree to climb. Nathan had climbed that tree. He had gotten stuck in it once and cried until his father talked him down. He had sat in its branches on summer evenings reading comic books when he was 9. He had carved his initials into the bark. I found them once, hidden on the north side, NS plus KW, for some girl from middle school whose name I've long forgotten. The tree was still here, still blooming, still keeping its promise regardless of everything that had happened around it. "I'm learning," I said. "Slowly, but I'm learning." Harry nodded and poured the last of the Pinot Noir, and we sat there together in the evening quiet of Maple Street, while the blossoms drifted down through the still air and landed wherever they chose to land. And I thought about Frank, and I thought about Nathan, and I thought about the 66-year-old woman I saw in the mirror every morning, the one with the steadier eyes than she used to have, the one who had been shown the worst that love can do when it sours into greed, and who had stood in the middle of it and held her ground. I thought about what it means to own something. Not the legal version, not the deed and title version, the real version. The version that says, "I am still here. This is still mine. You did not take it. My name is Dorothy Sullivan. I am 66 years old, and I live in a white wood frame house on Maple Street in Portland, Oregon. I made my coffee this morning in the kitchen where Frank used to make pancakes on Sundays. I am painting a picture of the apple tree he planted the year our son turned 5. I have been betrayed by someone I loved. I have been underestimated by people who should have known better. I have been treated like a problem to be managed, an obstacle to be removed, a signature waiting to be taken. And I am still here, still myself, still standing in the house we built. That after everything, that is enough. That is more than enough.